They had the kind of love people envied, beautiful, passionate, and perfectly curated for the world to see. Marquise and Zariyah were more than just a couple, they were a brand, a modern fairy tale played out on social media. Every post, every video, every affectionate caption reinforced the illusion of perfection. But one night, with just a single notification, everything changed. A comment, short, unexpected, and seemingly harmless, appeared beneath one of Marquise's Instagram posts. Most would have ignored it. But not him. Because the moment his eyes locked onto those words, his heart stopped. His hands clenched. His mind spiraled. And in that instant, love turned to suspicion, suspicion turned to obsession, and obsession led to something far worse. What happened next would leave an entire community in shock. A perfect marriage destroyed in a single night. A crime so brutal, so unthinkable, that no one saw it coming. How does a man go from a doting husband to a cold-blooded killer? How does love, so intoxicating, so all-consuming, turn deadly? Before we unravel this chilling case, make sure you're subscribed. Because what you're about to hear will make you question just how well you really know the person lying next to you. Zariyah Moore was the kind of woman people admired, envied, and aspired to be. At 29, she had built a thriving beauty brand from the ground up, turning her passion for skincare into a lucrative business. Her handmade products, carefully curated for melanated skin, weren't just about beauty, they were about empowerment. Women loved her not just for what she sold, but for what she represented: independence, success, and the ability to have it all. And on the surface, Zariyah did have it all. A booming business, a beautiful home, a picture-perfect family. Her husband, Marquise Dunbar, was the ideal partner, strong, hard-working, and undeniably handsome. A 32-year-old construction worker with a commanding presence, he was the kind of man who made women swoon and men take notes. He adored Zariyah, showered her with gifts, and flaunted their love just as much as she did. They weren't just in love, they were building a brand around their love. Their relationship had been years in the making. High school sweethearts who reconnected in their 20s, their story had all the makings of a romance novel. Struggles, growth, redemption, then marriage and a baby. Cairo was the final piece of their love story, the proof that they had truly made it. Their social media reflected that perfection. Family photos carefully edited for the right aesthetic. Loving captions that made thousands of women sigh in admiration. Anniversary posts that racked up thousands of likes. They weren't just relationship goals, they were proof that Black love was thriving. But social media only showed what they wanted people to see. Behind the curated moments and matching outfits, there were things the camera never captured. People close to Zariyah saw it. The way Marquise's jaw tightened when she laughed a little too long at another man's joke. The way his grip on her hand would tighten just enough to send a message. The way she carefully chose her words when speaking about their marriage, never straying too far from the script of perfection. Marquise loved Zariyah, but his love came with conditions. It came with unspoken rules. It came with an expectation: his word was final. He was a provider, a protector, and in his mind, that gave him the right to control the narrative of their marriage. Still, no one could deny that they looked happy. No one questioned the love in Zariyah's eyes when she spoke about Marquise. No one doubted that she meant it when she called him her king. And maybe she did, at least most of the time. But love built on control has a way of rotting from the inside out. No one knew what really lurked beneath the surface. Not yet. Marquise Dunbar was the kind of man who prided himself on being in control. He walked through life with a quiet confidence, his presence commanding without him having to say much. To the world, he was strong, self-assured, the kind of man who knew his worth. But inside, he was drowning in insecurities he refused to acknowledge. He had always been possessive when it came to Zariyah. At first, it had been subtle, an arm around her waist when another man looked at her too long, a gentle reminder to text him when she got home. But as her business took off, as her presence online grew, his need for control became more suffocating. Social media only made it worse. Zariyah had always been active, but now she had thousands of followers, people who hung on to her every post. When she posted a selfie and the comments flooded in, "Gorgeous. You're glowing, sis. Damn, Marquis a lucky man," he felt something dark coil in his stomach. Every notification was a reminder that other people had access to her, that they could admire her, desire her, and she welcomed it. It wasn't just strangers that set him off. He watched the way she interacted with her business partners, the men she networked with. When she mentioned a new collaboration or a meeting with a male investor, his mind spiraled. What did they talk about? What kind of looks did they exchange? He told himself it wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. Zariyah, on the other hand, saw things differently. She was growing, thriving. The woman who once dreamed of success was now living it. She was making money, making moves, stepping into rooms she had once only hoped to be in. And she loved her husband. She reassured him constantly, laughed off his jealousy, reminded him that he was the only man for her. But Marquis didn't want reassurance, he wanted submission. The argument started slowly, creeping into their once perfect life. At first, it was small things. Who were you on the phone with for so long? Why are you dressed like that? You never used to be like this. Zariyah brushed it off. Baby, you're overthinking. It's just business. You have nothing to worry about. But Marquis didn't hear reassurance. He heard deflection. And deflection meant deception. He started watching her more closely. Checking her phone when she was in the shower. Noticing the way she typed her password quickly, almost like she didn't want him to see. He paid attention to the way she angled her screen when she texted, the way she sometimes smiled at her phone. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to fuel his suspicions. And then, one night, he found what he was looking for. Zariyah had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a long day of meetings and content creation. Marquis lay beside her, his mind restless, his thoughts racing. He couldn't shake the feeling, the gnawing doubt in his chest. He needed to know. Carefully, he reached for her phone, his heart pounding. He had watched her enter her password enough times to memorize it. His hands felt clammy as he swiped through her apps, scrolling through messages, searching for something, anything. And then he saw it. A conversation buried deep in her DMs. A name he didn't recognize. And a message that sent his world crumbling around him. I miss you too. His vision blurred with rage. His hands trembled as he scrolled, his breath shallow, his pulse deafening in his ears. There were more messages, more interactions. Some seemed innocent, others felt like daggers to his chest. He read them over and over, his mind twisting every word into a betrayal. Proof. Zariyah had lied to him. And now, she was going to pay for it. Marquis's mind was a storm. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he stared at the phone screen, reading the comment over and over. Daddy, you so handsome. The words made his stomach churn. Someone was playing with him. Someone had the audacity to use his son's name to leave a comment like that. His first thought was that it had to be a mistake, some troll, a random bot. But as he clicked on the profile, dread sank deep into his bones. The account looked real. Too real. It had pictures of Cairo, family outings, moments that only someone close to them could have. It felt calculated, intentional. He scrolled through the followers, his vision blurring in rage until one name stood out like a flashing red light. At Big Dre 216. Private account. No posts visible. But the mutual friends list told him everything he needed to know. Zariyah was following him. And worse, this Dre motherfucker was following the page dedicated to his son. Marquis's breath turned shallow, his hands tightening around his phone. His mind raced back through every argument, every time he had felt something was off but had no proof. Now, here it was, staring him dead in the face. Zariyah walked into the bedroom, humming to herself, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She had just gotten back from a girls' night, still glowing from the evening. She smelled like vanilla and honey, her makeup flawless, her smile easy. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Who the fuck is at Big Dre 216? Her head snapped up at the sound of his voice, sharp and cold. She glanced at his phone, her expression shifting from confusion to mild irritation. Marquise, it's not that serious. She let out a soft scoff, shaking her head. He took a step closer, his grip tightening around the phone. So you're laughing? His voice was dangerously low now. You think I'm stupid? Zariyah sighed, crossing her arms. Baby, it's just an account for Cairo. I made it to save memories, that's all. His jaw clenched. But why the fuck is this nigga following it? She exhaled sharply, rolling her eyes. That's my old friend from high school. You're tripping, Marquise. Old friend. The words cut through him like a blade. She wasn't even trying to deny it. She wasn't rushing to explain. She was standing there like he was the problem. Something inside him cracked. In 2 strides, he was in front of her, gripping her wrist hard. You lying to me? His voice was low, deadly. Zariyah's eyes widened as she yanked away from his grasp. You are not about to ruin my night over some bullshit. She turned to walk away. She never made it to the door. Marquise grabbed her by the back of the neck, his grip rough as he spun her around. Zariyah gasped, struggling against him, her nails digging into his forearm. Let me go, Marquise. She shouted, her voice shaking. But he wasn't listening. His mind was gone, swallowed by the rage that had been building for months, maybe even years. He had given her everything. Loved her. Provided for her. And this is what she did. His breath was hot against her face as he spoke through clenched teeth. You thought you could play me? Tears welled in Zariyah's eyes as she shoved against his chest. You're hurting me. Let me go. For a brief second, the old Marquise flickered in his mind, the man who loved her, the man who would have done anything to make her happy. But the fury was stronger. Zariyah clawed at his hands, panic taking over. Marquise, stop. You're scaring me. That only fueled him. He shoved her backward. She stumbled, her heel twisting beneath her, sending her crashing into the dresser. Picture frames tumbled to the floor, the sound of glass shattering echoing through the room. Zariyah gasped, gripping the edge of the dresser for balance. Her breath came in ragged pants, her chest heaving. You've lost your damn mind. Marquis stepped closer, his face unreadable. But in that moment, he had already made his decision. And Zariyah's nightmare was just beginning. Marquis stood over Zariyah, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. The room was eerily silent except for the sound of his own pulse thudding in his ears. She lay crumpled on the hardwood floor, gasping for air, her fingers twitching weakly as she tried to move. Her once vibrant brown eyes were glazed over with fear and confusion, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Marquisa's mind was a haze of red. She did this to herself. She made me do this. His hands ached from the force he had used on her throat, the imprints of her nails still burning against his skin. His breathing was shallow, erratic. His vision tunneled in on her fragile form, and deep inside, he knew there was no going back. He staggered back a step, his body trembling. Zariyah's breaths were weak, uneven gasps that barely lifted her chest. She wasn't dead. Not yet. But she would be. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the kitchen. The thought slithered into his mind before he could stop it. His feet moved before he could second-guess himself. The cold metal handle of the knife felt foreign in his grip as he pulled it from the wooden block on the counter. His knuckles turned white as he gripped it tighter, his mind screaming at him, his conscience begging him to stop. But the rage drowned out the voice of reason. Zariyah's body convulsed slightly as she tried to move, her lips forming silent words. She looked so small, so fragile now. Nothing like the strong, independent woman the world had adored. Marquise stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her. "Marquise," her voice barely came out, weak and full of pleading. For a moment, something inside him wavered. Then he plunged the knife into her stomach. Her body arched, a sickening, wet gurgle leaving her lips as her eyes stretched wide in agony. Blood spilled instantly, pooling beneath her like dark ink, soaking into her dress, staining her hands as she instinctively tried to clutch the wound. She gasped, her back curling off the floor, her mouth opening in a silent scream as her fingers weakly grasped at his wrist. But he didn't stop. He yanked the knife out, only to drive it in again. And again. And again. The blade tore through flesh, through muscle, through bone. Blood splattered across his face, warm and sticky, dripping onto his shirt, his arms, his hands. The smell of iron filled the air, thick and suffocating. Zariyah's struggles became weaker with each stab, her body convulsing, her fingers twitching. Her head rolled to the side, her once lively eyes now distant, unseeing. A final, ragged breath left her lips before she went completely still. Marquise staggered back, the knife slipping from his fingers, clattering against the blood-soaked floor. His hands trembled violently as he looked down at her. Zariyah Moore, his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he had loved, was gone. And he had killed her. The room felt suffocating, the weight of what he had done pressing down on him like an avalanche. The pictures on the wall mocked him, images of their happy moments, their picture-perfect life. Their son's innocent eyes stared back at him from a framed photo on the dresser, oblivious to the horror that had unfolded just feet away. His breathing turned ragged as the reality set in. He had destroyed everything. And there was no way to undo it. The living room reeked of blood and sweat. Marquise lay flat on his stomach, his cheek pressed against the cold hardwood floor, his wrists crushed beneath the weight of the officer's knee. The deafening wail of his son's cries filled the air, a haunting soundtrack to the worst moment of his life. His arms were yanked behind him, the cold steel of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. His mind was a blur, but he could still see Zariyah's lifeless body sprawled across the floor, her once warm skin now a chilling shade of pale. The officers shouted commands, but they sounded distant, like echoes through a tunnel. "Hands behind your back. You are under arrest for the murder of Zariyah Moore." The rest was lost in the whirlwind of flashing red and blue lights. The hallway filled with neighbors, some peeking from their doors, others whispering frantically, their faces a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. Someone was recording on their phone. The footage would go viral before the night was even over. As they dragged Marquise outside, the cold Cleveland air slapped him in the face, jolting him out of his daze. Cameras were already rolling. Reporters shoved microphones toward the police officers, shouting over one another. Is it true he was caught in the act? Sources say this was a domestic dispute, any confirmation? Was this premeditated? The internet caught fire within hours. Social media exploded with speculation. News outlets plastered Zariyah's radiant smile on every screen. A young, ambitious businesswoman, adored by thousands, now reduced to nothing more than a gruesome headline. Another woman taken too soon. Her own husband. This is sickening. Y'all always ignore the red flags until it's too late. But not everyone saw Marquise as a monster. His fans, gym followers, and longtime supporters flooded the comments with disbelief. Something ain't adding up. Man, y'all don't know the whole story yet. Watch how fast they turn on a black man before the facts come out. Meanwhile, news anchors dissected the case like vultures picking at a fresh corpse. An Instagram influencer murdered in her own home, by the man she trusted the most. Police recovered a knife, soaked in blood. Reports indicate multiple stab wounds, this was personal. Domestic violence doesn't start with murder. It starts with control, isolation, jealousy. Detectives combed through Zariyah's phone, uncovering the digital footprints of a woman trapped in a toxic love story. A deleted voice memo. I love him, but sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating. A text to a close friend, sent weeks before her death. He checks my phone when I'm sleeping. I don't even feel safe in my own home. A Google search history filled with questions no woman should ever have to ask. How to leave a controlling partner safely. Signs of a dangerous relationship. The messages painted a chilling picture. Marquise hadn't just snapped in a moment of rage. He had been unraveling for months. The jealousy, the control, the accusations, it was always leading to this. In the days that followed, candlelight vigils were held in Zariyah's honor. Her name became a hashtag. Hashtag Justice for Zariyah. The tragedy became a movement. But Marquise? He sat in a cold jail cell, staring at the blood beneath his fingernails, wondering when, if ever, the nightmare would end. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed in, their faces unreadable. Marquise sat stiffly beside his attorney, dressed in a dark suit that hung looser than it once had. His hands were cuffed beneath the table, his breathing shallow. This was it. The moment that would decide the rest of his life. Zariyah's family sat in the first row, her mother clutching a crumpled tissue, her father's jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Friends, supporters, and reporters filled the rest of the courtroom, all waiting for the verdict. The judge cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a decision? A woman in the front row stood, gripping a piece of paper. We have, Your Honor. Marquise exhaled sharply. The words that followed sealed his fate. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Marquise Dunbar, guilty. A gasp rippled through the room, followed by muffled sobs from Zariyah's mother. Marquise's attorney whispered something in his ear, but he barely heard it. His vision blurred, his ears rang, his body felt like it was floating, separate from reality. The judge's voice cut through the fog. Marquise Dunbar, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A collective exhale. Some people wept. Others nodded in grim satisfaction. Marquise? He just sat there. Numb. Outside the courthouse, a storm raged. He had been pushed to his breaking point. Zariyah knew what she was doing. She played with fire. The internet was split. Debates raged over who was truly at fault. Victim blaming crept into the discussions, with some claiming that Zariyah should have left sooner, that she should have seen the signs. But one thing was undeniable. A 1-year-old child had lost both his parents in a single night. Cairo would grow up without a mother to kiss his bruises, without a father to teach him how to throw a football. He would one day read about his parents, their love story turned tragedy, his mother's face frozen in time on news articles and documentaries. He would grow up in the shadow of a crime that stole everything from him. And Marquise? He would spend the rest of his days in a prison cell, haunted by the only question that truly mattered. Was it worth it? This case serves as a haunting example of how love, when poisoned by insecurity and obsession, can turn into something unrecognizable, something deadly. Zariyah was a young woman with dreams, ambition, and a future, yet all of that was taken from her in a single act of violence. What should have been a love story ended in a nightmare, leaving behind only grief, unanswered questions, and a child who will grow up knowing his mother through news articles and memorial posts. Marquise claimed to love Zariyah, but love isn't possession. It isn't control. And it certainly isn't the kind of rage that leaves someone lifeless on the floor. His inability to confront his own demons turned him into a man capable of the unthinkable. If he had recognized his insecurities, if he had sought help, if he had walked away instead of lashing out, could Zariyah still be alive? In the age of social media, where attention is currency and validation is often mistaken for love, how many relationships teeter on the edge of obsession? How many partners scroll through likes and comments, letting their minds spiral into dark places. How often does unchecked jealousy turn into something irreversible? This story isn't just about Marquise and Zariyah. It's a cautionary tale. A warning. Because when love turns into possession, when suspicion festers into violence, nobody wins. If this case left you speechless, stay tuned for more stories of passion turned deadly. Like, share, and subscribe for more true crime cases that remind us just how thin the line between love and obsession truly is.